They thought the deaf man couldn't hear them. They were half right. I couldn't hear a word over my wife's casket, but I've read lips for 40 years, and I watched the man about to marry my daughter mouth the words the old man goes in a home by the wedding from 10 feet away, standing next to flowers I picked out for her myself. I didn't blink. I kept my hand on Eleanor's casket, and I read the rest off his lips. And we locked down the land, before he figures out what he signed. That was the moment, not the funeral, not the loss. That sentence, mouthed across my wife's body by a man who wasn't even family yet, whom my daughter was going to marry in 6 weeks, who was certain the sound couldn't reach me. He was right about the sound. He had no idea about the rest. Welcome back to Patriarch's Revenge. Settle in. This one's a slow burn worth every minute. Smash that like button and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. Say hello to the others down there. This crew always shows up for each other. Subscribe and be one of us so you never miss a story. You found the right place. My name is Harlan Voss. I'm 73. I've been profoundly deaf since a transformer blew 4 feet from my head on a job site in 1984. And for 39 years, I have watched people say things in front of me they'd never say out loud, because the world decides a deaf man is an empty chair. Let me back up. The order matters, and I want you to understand what I lost before I tell you what they tried to take. Eleanor was my wife for 49 years. She was my ears for 40 of them, in every way a person can mean it. She didn't just interpret. She'd catch my eye across a room and tap 2 fingers on her collarbone, our sign, ours alone. That meant slow down, they're lying to you. She was the smartest person I ever met, and she loved a deaf carpenter who had nothing when she found him, and she built a life with me that ended on a Sunday in March in a hospital bed, while I held her hand and read I love you off her lips one last time. We had one daughter, Colette, she's 45, and 6 months after Eleanor got sick, Colette started seeing a man named granddaughter. He proposed the week after the funeral was scheduled. I'll say that again, because it matters. He proposed to my grieving daughter the same week we were picking out her mother's casket. Called it something good to hold on to. Set the wedding for 6 weeks out. Life's short, we shouldn't wait. I have never once, in the time I've known that man, caught him looking at me like I'm a person. He looks at me like I'm weather, something to get around. Grant is in development, land deals. He came at me with a good suit and a firm handshake, and a way of talking slow and loud, mouthing every word too big, like I was a foreigner or a child, when the truth is his slow, performed mouth made him easy to read than a natural talker. He never understood that. He thought he was talking to a wall. He was talking to a camera. Now here's what you need to know about the land, because it's the whole game. I own 400 acres of ridgeline outside Asheville. Bought it in 1979 for almost nothing, when nobody wanted a mountain you couldn't farm. Eleanor and I built our house on it with our own hands. 200 of those acres are just trees and sky and the grave of 3 dogs. But the other 200 border a parcel a resort group has been trying to assemble for 3 years. My ridge is the missing piece, the view lot. Without my land, their whole project is landlocked and worthless. With it, it's worth a number with a lot of zeros. Grant works in development. Grant knows exactly what my ridge is worth to those people. And Grant proposed to the one woman standing between that resort group and a fortune. 6 weeks after her mother got a terminal diagnosis. I'd like to tell you I saw it from the first date. I didn't. Grief makes you slow, and I spent Eleanor's last 2 years just trying to keep her here. I wasn't watching lips. I was watching monitors. That was my mistake, and it nearly cost me everything. The funeral was at the house. Eleanor wanted that. Casket in the front room, the room we built, the room where she used to sit across from me at dinner and tap her collarbone when my brother told one of his stories. I stood by her for 4 hours and let people file past. And here's the thing about being deaf at your own wife's funeral. Nobody talks to you. They talk near you. They squeeze your shoulder, mouth so sorry right at you like a phrase book, then turn away and become themselves again, and their real faces come out, and their real mouths start moving. I've spent my whole life in that gap. The gap between what people say to me and what they say the second they think I've stopped counting. So I saw the whole thing. Grant, by the window, talking to a man I didn't recognize, sharp suit, a lawyer's way of standing. I read Grant's mouth clean over the top of my dead wife's casket. Paperwork's already drafted. Wedding's in 6 weeks. Once we're married, Colette can put a power of attorney in front of him, and he'll sign anything she hands him. He trusts her completely. The old man goes in a home by the wedding, and we lock down the land before he figures out what he signed. The lawyer said something back. I caught the end of his proffer. Can't understand any of it anyway. And Grant smiled. At a funeral, he smiled and mouthed one more thing, and I'll carry it to my own grave. He can't even hear us say it. I want to tell you what I did in that moment, because it's the most important thing in this story, and I almost got it wrong. I did nothing. Something went cold and flat and enormous in my chest, and every instinct said cross the room. Grab him by his good suit. Show the whole family what kind of man proposes to a grieving daughter and schemes over her mother's casket 6 weeks before the wedding. And I didn't. I looked back down at Eleanor, and I felt those 2 fingers on my collarbone, clear as anything. Slow down. They're lying to you. Don't let them see you know. Because here's what a deaf man learns early. Your reaction is the only thing they can read off you. They're watching my face the way I'm watching their mouths. If I flinched, Grant would know I'd caught it, and he'd change the plan. And a man who changes the plan is a man you can't track. So I kept my face at the funeral, grieving, absent, empty. And behind the empty chair, I started counting. The first thing I did the next morning was find my ears again. Not Eleanor. Nobody replaces Eleanor. But I have a granddaughter, Colette's daughter from her first marriage, long before Grant. Her name is Emmy. She's 22, and she's the only person left in that family who learned to sign for me because she wanted to, not because she had to. She learned it at 9 off a library book, so she could tell me secrets no one else could hear. Grant never learned a word of it. Think about that. He's about to marry into a family with a deaf patriarch, and he never learned hello, because you don't learn the language of a chair. Emmy came over. I sat her at Eleanor's kitchen table and signed to her fast, the real speed. The speed I only use with people who are truly mine. I need to tell you what I saw at the funeral, and then I need to ask you to lie to your mother for me. Emmy went very still. Then she signed back one word. Grant. Grant, I signed. And my granddaughter, 22 years old, set her jaw exactly the way Eleanor used to, and signed, Tell me everything. I've hated him since the day she brought him home. Nobody ever believed me. Here's what we knew. And what we didn't. We knew Grant wanted the land. We knew the plan ran through the wedding, marry Colette, then use her to get a power of attorney over me, then use the poor deaf old man can't manage any more as the story that made theft look like mercy. The wedding wasn't romance. The wedding was a key. He needed to be family before he could reach the lock. What we didn't know was whether Colette was in on it. That's what kept me up. That's my daughter, Eleanor's daughter. And I could not tell from the funeral whether she knew what she was marrying or whether she was just the pen he planned to use. I needed to know, because everything downstream depended on it, whether this ended with me destroying one man or losing my whole family. So the first move wasn't legal. It was human. I needed to watch my daughter's face when she didn't know she was being watched. And a deaf man watching faces has an advantage nobody ever accounts for. 3 days after the funeral, Colette and Grant came to check on me. I made sure Emmy was there. I made sure I wore my hearing aids, the cosmetic ones, the ones that do nothing, that I wear precisely because when people see them, they assume I can hear a little, and they get careless, and they speak more and mouth less, and speaking is even easier to read. Little tracks, 40 years of little tracks. We sat in the front room where the casket had been. Grant did his things slow, loud. How are you holding up? Elaine. And I nodded, and looked lost, and I watched. Then Grant took a call on the porch, and through the window in profile I read him. He's a wreck, perfect. Move the paperwork up. The second the wedding clears we go. And here's the part that broke my heart, and saved my family in the same breath. I turned back to the room, and Colette was watching her fiancé through the window too, and I saw my daughter's face. Really saw it, the way only someone who reads faces instead of voices can. She didn't look like a conspirator. She looked like a woman watching the man she was about to marry 3 days after burying her mother and feeling the floor start to shift. Confusion first, then something colder underneath. She didn't know, but she was starting to. I made a decision in that room that changed everything. I wasn't going to tell Colette what I'd seen. Not yet. Because if I told her, she'd confront him, and he'd have an explanation. Men like Grant always have an explanation. And 6 weeks from her wedding, with her mother in the ground, she'd want to believe it. People swallow enormous lies to avoid a truth that size. So I wasn't going to tell her. I was going to let her see it herself. And I had 6 weeks, a granddaughter who could sign, and a lifetime of knowing exactly how people betray themselves when they think no one who matters is listening. Let me show you how it went. First, I played the part they wrote for me. Grant wanted a soft, confused, grieving old man who'd sign anything once the wedding made it possible. Fine, I got Wes. I forgot things in front of him. I had Emmy translate, and deliberately mistranslate simple questions, so Grant would think my mind was slipping. I let him catch me looking lost at the mail. Every time I watched him relax, watched him get greedy. A patient thief is dangerous. A greedy one makes mistakes, and Grant was getting greedy on schedule. Within 2 weeks he tried to move the wedding up. Told Colette they should marry sooner, while your father still has you to lean on. I read it off his mouth on my own porch. He thought he was racing my decline. He was racing a trap and handing me the hammer. Second, I found out who else was in the room. The lawyer from the funeral. Emmy did what a 22-year-old does better than any private investigator. She found him. Marcus Vane. Censured twice by the state bar. One of those censures involved, sit with this, a durable power of attorney executed against an elderly client who lacked capacity. This wasn't Grant's first ridge. He had a specialist, a man who'd done this before to someone else's grandfather and kept his license by the skin of his teeth, which meant Grant was more dangerous than I thought. And it meant there was already a paper trail with his man's fingerprints on it, if I knew where to push. I knew where to push. I've signed more legal documents than Grant's ever read. A deaf man who owns 400 acres and once ran a construction company learns to read a contract the way other men read the sports page, because nobody's ever going to explain it to him out loud, and every person across the table assumes he doesn't understand what he's signing. That assumption has cost a lot of people a lot of money over the years. Never me. Third, I got my own lawyer, quietly. Delphine Okoff. Daughter of a man I built a house for in 1991, now the most feared elder law attorney in 3 counties, and she does not lose. I went myself, brought Emmy to interpret, though Delphine had already downloaded a text app so she could type straight to me. The single most respectful thing a hearing person has done for me in years. I nearly wept in her waiting room. I told her everything. The funeral, the lips, Grant, Marcus Vane, the wedding, the land. Delphine typed 1 line and turned the screen to me. They need the marriage to reach you. So let's put everything they want on the other side of a door the marriage can't open. Over 3 weeks we did 4 things, and the sequence is the whole point. 1, I sat for a full cognitive and capacity evaluation, geriatric specialist, and the right deaf culture interpreter, so nothing got lost, so no one could ever recast a hearing barrier as confusion. I passed everything cold. Notarized, sealed, dated, weeks before any wedding, any paperwork. So the instant Grant argues I lacked capacity, I've got a document from before he moved proving I had it in spades. His whole story, the poor deaf old man didn't understand, dies the moment it's born. 2, I moved the land, all 400 acres into an irrevocable trust I don't personally control, which means no power of attorney over me can ever touch it. The one thing Grant needed was now behind a door with no handle on his side. Emmy's a beneficiary. Colette's a beneficiary. Grant is named nowhere. 3, a no-contest clause with teeth. Any beneficiary who challenges the trust or is found to have attempted to procure my assets through fraud or undue influence forfeits their share and their spouse's interest entirely. So even after the wedding, Grant couldn't inherit through Colette, and if he pushed, he'd vaporize her share too. To rob me, he'd have to rob his own bride in public on the record. For the one that mattered most, I did nothing to stop the wedding. I let it come. Because a crime you prevent is a suspicion. A crime you let a man walk all the way up to is a confession. Now here's where it turns, and where Colette comes back, because I told you I wasn't going to lose my family, and I meant it. The wedding was 2 weeks out, and I decided the truth couldn't come from me. It had to come from his own mouth. She had to read his lips the way I did. She can't do what I do. But there's more than one way to make someone finally see the thing they've refused to see. So 10 days before the wedding, I invited Colette to the house. Alone, no Grant. And I did the hardest thing in this whole story. I sat my daughter at Eleanor's table, Immy interpreting, and I told her the truth, all of it, what I read off Grant's lips over her mother's casket. The old man goes in a home by the wedding. We lock down the land before he figures out what he signed. He can't even hear us say it. Colette shook her head. He wouldn't. Dad, you must have misread. I stopped her. I signed one thing, and Immy spoke it slow. Colette, I have read lips for 39 years. I read your mother tell me she loved me while a machine breathed for her. I do not misread, but I am not asking you to believe me. I slid a paper across the table. A power of attorney, the one Grant and Marcus Vane had already drafted, ready for the day after the wedding. Delphine had gotten a copy, a story for another day, but let's just say Marcus Vane also talks in front of people he shouldn't. Read it out loud, I signed, to me, so I can read it off your lips the way I read everything. And my daughter read it out loud, and I watched her own mouth form the words that would let Granddaughter, the day after he married her, sell my land, place me in a facility, and manage the disposition of family real property. And I watched her face come apart as she heard herself say it. She reached the bottom and stopped, looked up, and she signed to me, clumsy out of practice, but she signed. She reached for my language when it mattered, the 2 words she learned as a little girl. You're right. Then she put 2 fingers on her own collarbone. Eleanor sign. She remembered it. My whole life came up my throat, and I can't speak, never could, so I just took my daughter's hand the way I held her mother's, and we sat in the room where the casket had been, and we needed no sound for any of it. I'll make the end quick, because you've earned it. There was no wedding, but we didn't just cancel it. Delphine and I decided the day itself was the trap, because Grant was going to show up certain he'd won, and certainty makes men careless, and I wanted him careless in a room full of witnesses. So Colette let it proceed, right up to the rehearsal dinner 2 nights before. Grant's family there. His performance in full bloom, the doting fiancé, the slow, loud H.A.I.L.A.M., we're so glad you're here, the hand on my shoulder. He even stood to give a toast about family and holding what matters close. And when he sat down, Delphine Ocuff walked in. Very good suit, a folder. Grant's face did the thing I'd waited weeks to read. Immy signed it all to me, fast, grinning the whole time. The revised trust, his name nowhere, the land locked away where no marriage and no power of attorney could reach it. The sealed capacity evaluation that turned his whole story to ash. The no contest clause that meant 1 step forward would detonate Colette's inheritance in front of his own parents. And a letter, copied to the state bar, about Marcus Vane's renewed interest in powers of attorney executed against the elderly. A sentence built to make a twice-censured lawyer leave the county, which is what he did. But the moment, the real one, the one I did all of this for, Colette stood up at that rehearsal dinner. She didn't go to her fiancé's side. She came to her father's. And in front of both families, she took the ring off her finger and set it on the table beside his plate. And then she looked Grant in the eye and signed, so only I could read it, in the language he never bothered to learn in all his scheming. He can't hear you, Grant, but he saw everything, and so did I. Grant didn't understand a single word of it. The chair he'd talked around for months had just closed the trap, and he never learned enough of my language to hear it snap shut. Here's where everyone is now. Grant is gone. He fought nothing, because Delphine made very sure that fighting meant an open courtroom, and the phrase proposed to a grieving daughter and schemed over her mother's casket to steal a deaf man's land. Even a man that's shameless could do that math. The resort group won't return his calls anymore either. Turns out you're only useful to people like that while you have a way in. He doesn't. Marcus Vane surrendered his license in the fall rather than face the complaint. I wasn't the first Ridge. Once the bar pulled that thread, 3 other families came forward, 3 other old people who didn't understand what they signed. My deafness made me an easy mark on paper and the hardest witness alive in a chair. I emptied out a practice that had been quietly robbing my kind for years. Colent signs now. Every day a little better. She comes to the house, and we sit at Eleanor's table, and she tells me about her day with her hands, slow and careful, and sometimes she gets a word wrong and I correct her and she laughs. And it is the sound I'd choose to hear if I could choose one sound on this earth. Emmy is getting a degree in deaf education. She says it's because of me. I told her it's because of Eleanor, who taught a 9-year-old to read a library book so she could tell her grandfather secrets. Emmy says it can be both. Emmy's usually right. The land is still there. 400 acres of trees and sky, and 3 dead dogs, and a house 2 people built with their hands. The answer to the resort group is no. It'll be no after I'm gone too, the trust says so, and I read every word of it myself before I signed, the way I've read every word of everything, my whole silent life. Last week Colette came up to the Ridge with me at sunset. We stood where Eleanor's ashes are. She didn't say anything because she's learning that with me you don't have to. She just reached over and put 2 fingers on my collarbone. Our sign, Eleanor's sign. Slow down, they're lying to you. Except this time, she held them there a second longer and turned it into something new, something that meant the opposite. You can rest now. Nobody here is lying to you anymore. I can't hear a thing. Haven't in 39 years. I heard that just fine. If this one reached you, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Subscribe so the next one finds you. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and did you catch the moment you knew Grant was finished? I'll see you next time.